Hello and welcome to my channel. I'm Mrs. Happy Catholic, and today I'm wanting to do a video on pants and women wearing pants. I recently had a question from one of my viewers about whether it's appropriate or ideal or sinful or otherwise for women to wear pants, Catholic women, women in general. And I thought, you know what, it's probably worth doing a video on, even though it's kind of, a sideline issue, but it's something that really bothers a lot of people. There's a lot of misinformation going around about it. And I just wanted to correct that if I could kind of bring some clarity and some peace to people who have questions just from my own research. And also this lady who reached out to me, I will get to what she shared with me in a moment. But first, I just want to throw out there that there is no magisterial statement anywhere against women wearing pants. Just in case you're wondering, that's never been church teaching. You can't find it anywhere. There's not any document of any level of magisterium that actually applies to this, at least of the universal magisterium. There is a letter that Cardinal Basilio Pompili wrote to community of nuns in Italy that is often quoted as Vatican standards of, the Pope for modest dress for women all over the world. I covered that in another video about modesty myths that I did with Christine Niles that I recommend you go and watch if you haven't seen it already. It was very interesting to talk about that, to talk about the actual letter and how it's misquoted and taken like this universal statement applying to all women everywhere when he was actually writing to women religious. And in there, he doesn't actually talk about pants. He talks about a dress can only be called modest, which is, these things. Then he goes on to talk about. But again, considering his audience, so they're not wearing pants because nuns wear habits. They don't wear pants. Okay. So that wasn't even addressed though in that document. And it wasn't even really a document. It was a letter, just a letter from one bishop to a community of nuns. So anyway, pants, they're kind of like this amorphous thing and everybody's got an opinion on it. Even some Protestant people will be out there on YouTube and other places talking about how, women just shouldn't wear it. It's a sin. It's in the Bible. It's in Deuteronomy. Okay. Well, we're going to get to that too. But first I did want to say, for anybody who hasn't heard this quote, Pope St. Nicholas I was written a letter by missionaries to the Bulgarians. They were asking if it was okay for the women in Bulgaria to wear pants because that was their customary dress at the time. And as they were converting into the church, they're like, is this okay? Is this modest? And what do we do? And so he wrote back to them, and I will read the quote from his letter to the questions of the Bulgars. It says, letter 99, chapter 9 AD 866. Okay. He says, we consider what you asked about pants. The word is femoralia that he uses, but can be translated pants. Okay. So here, some have speculated that this word refers to a sort of protective article of clothing, such as armor or underpants. But if it pertained to the outward modest covering of a woman, such as the question suggests, which the Pope is answering, why on earth would it have been voiced in the first place? I mean, if they're covered and we're talking about undergarments, like why would they bother writing to the Pope about what kind of undergarments the Bulgarian women were wearing? So I just want to say that for people who are like, femoralia doesn't mean pants, not like an outward article of clothing. It's talking about something else. But from the context, that doesn't really make sense. So I'm going to read you the rest of the quote. Okay. He says, we consider what you asked about pants to be irrelevant, for we do not wish the exterior style of your clothing to be changed, but rather the behavior of the inner man within you. Nor do we desire to know what you are wearing except Christ, for however many of you have been baptized in Christ, have put on Christ, Galatians 3:27, but rather how you are progressing in faith and good works. But since you ask concerning these matters in your simplicity, namely because you were afraid lest it be held against you as a sin if you diverge in the slightest way from the custom of other Christians, and lest we seem to take anything away from your desire, we declare that in our books, pants, femoralia, are ordered to be made, not in order that women may use them, but that men may. But act now so that just as you pass from the old to the new man, Ephesians chapter 4, 22 through 24, and Colossians 3, verses 9 through 10, you pass from your prior custom to ours in all things, but really do what you please. For whether you or your women wear or do not wear pants, neither impedes your salvation, nor leads to any increase of your virtue. Of course, because we have said that pants are ordered to be made, it should be noted that we put on pants spiritually when we restrain the lust of the flesh through abstinence, for those places are constrained by pants in which the seats of luxury are known to be. This is why the first humans, when they felt illicit motions in their members after sin, ran into the leaves of a fig tree and wove loincloths for themselves. See Genesis 3:7. But these are spiritual pants, which you still could not bear. And if I may speak with the apostle, you are not yet able, for you are still carnal. 1 Corinthians 3:2. And thus we have said a few things on this matter, although with God's gift we could say many more. Unquote. So that's the end of the Pope. And here, he did say in there, in our books, pants are ordered to be made, not in order that women may use them, but that men may. But he treats that like kind of an incidental point. He's like, yeah, men wear pants in our culture, but really that's not the important thing. Like, he's not advocating, of course not, wearing whatever in the heck you want or nothing if you want. He's saying that really this isn't the question you should be asking. The question you should be asking is, what is the disposition of the heart? And has the heart moved toward Christ? And is the dress, is that impeding it or not? In this case, it isn't. He doesn't consider it's an impediment because he says, neither impedes your salvation nor leads to any increase of your virtue, the wearing of pants for women. So that's what Pope St. Nicholas I had to say. And as far as I have discovered, no other pope has actually made a statement about pants. So pants are new to Western culture, relatively new, because women weren't widely wearing them until like 60s or 70s. They were coming in actually in the 1800s gradually, but it happened very slowly. And then it kind of went boom. And all of a sudden women were wearing them more commonly in the 70s. So it's definitely kind of a novelty to our culture, considering the time, the context of time. But in other cultures around the world, pants have been very traditional for women to wear. And so we can't just think like Westerners. We have to remember that there's a universal church and world out there that has a lot of different varieties of customs. And there's a lot of men that wear, dress that looks basically just like women's dress in other cultures. And it's very hard to really distinguish, men's from women's dress. Okay. But as far as the pants go, I mean, I looked up different cultures where women traditionally wore pants or similar garments. And ancient Egypt, men and women would wear these garments, which were like long tunics reaching the ankles. And I'm not going to tell you all the names of these because I'm going to trip over them and it's going to sound ridiculous. Anyway, I could, if you wanted me to, for your entertainment, call a series. Okay. That's what they were called, the tunics. And underneath they were kind of sheer, the lightweight linen that the women would wear. But they would wear leggings or pants called shendit underneath. Okay. So they were wearing them in ancient Greece. They were wearing tunics that looked very much like the men's clothing, but also pants underneath. They had a special name for those. And ancient China, both men and women wore pants. This is a fun word, sharawadgi. These were made of a type of silk and were worn with a long tunic. Some nomadic cultures, such as the Mongols and the nomads of Central Asia, women have traditionally worn pants. Women have traditionally worn pants called DL as part of their everyday clothing. The examples that I listed here are all cultures where the wearing of pants by women was a traditional and accepted practice. And there was, the Inuits of Alaska traditionally wore pants too. It wasn't until Western culture sort of made itself known to them and they were influenced by that, and the women started wearing skirts. But before that, they'd always worn pants because, well, obviously it's very practical to wear pants where it's very cold, and to layer up like that. So that's just something to think about too, as far as culturally across the world, not to get too stuck in our little Western mindset. And I think that's where the Pope St. Nicholas was just like, yeah, but there's a whole range, and these, things within that range can be acceptable. We don't have to boil everything down to this very fine, narrow, black and white thing. Because again, the Spirit needs to be dictating this, and you need to seek first to have the best heart for Jesus instead of just all the right boxes to cross, the I's to dot, and all that. Okay. Another thing I just thought I should address was that story that people bring up often about Padre Pio talking to this woman from Toronto who had a clothing store, and she went to go to confession to him in the story, and he said he wouldn't give her absolution until she went home and disposed of all of her stock of women's pants and like threw them away or destroyed them, not give them to somebody else who might actually use them, but make sure that they're trashed basically before he would give her absolution. And he said, you can either come back here and I'll give you absolution, or you can seek absolution from another priest in Canada if you don't want to do what I'm telling you to, but I will know if you did it or not. And so this lady told the biographer this story. Obviously it's not from Padre Pio because it happened in the confessional. And so this lady published it. Anne McGinn Sillis, she wrote this biography of Padre Pio. It's called Arrivederci Padre Pio, A Spiritual Daughter Remembers, and she has it in there. And so you'll hear that quoted in various ways all over the place. So this lady who had contacted me with the pants question, she said that she'd called the National Shrine of Padre Pio in Pennsylvania to ask them if they could tell her anything about the story. And she told them the story, and they were like, we've never heard that story before. We don't know what to say about that. Okay, so I thought, well, that's very interesting. I'm going to actually do a similar thing here because I reached out to the shrine of Padre Pio in Pietrelcina, Italy. So I told them the story, and I said, kind of what I do, my apostolate, and this question that I'm researching. And I was like, is there anything you can tell me about Padre Pio in this story? And I waited a couple weeks. They finally got back to me. Here, I'll do a screen share with this so you can see it. All they said was, thank you for your email. We cannot help you as we have never heard of this story. Regards, Padre Pio Group. Okay, so I'm showing you the screenshot of the email. That's what they sent me. We have never heard this story. Okay, so people who are living and breathing St. Padre Pio, they work at his home monastery shrine. If anybody should know this, they should know it. They've never even heard of it. Okay, which tells you how fringe it is. I'm not saying it's not true, but it's also true that sometimes people make things up, and sometimes it's very convenient to tell people things that is in line with your certain program. And so, I mean, I'm not accusing anybody of dishonesty, but I'm just saying this is an alleged, it's like a story from mouth to mouth. We've got from one person, and we don't know anything else about these, this woman that told the story to this author, and even the author, what do we really know about her? So it's kind of like, it's just not something to hang your hat on. Be like, Padre Pio thought it was a sin for women to wear pants, and so it's a sin for women to wear pants. And I'm like, even if it's true that he thought it was a sin for women to wear pants, he is one man, one saint in the church's history. He's not infallible. The church never endorsed that view of his or taught it. And so take it or leave it, because it's very subjective, and it doesn't mean he wasn't onto something, but it's just not something that you can really throw in to give weight to this issue. Also, another thing that people reference when they're talking about immodest fashions and pants being a sin for women is the message of Fatima, which supposedly included, quote, fashions will much offend our Lord. People who serve God should not follow the fashions. The church has no fashions. Our Lord is always the same, unquote. And they use that to say that women wearing pants is a development. That means, it wasn't always the same. And that this is a fashion that, like they take this thing and then they interpret it. I notice this pattern a lot when people have an axe to grind. They take a quote or something, they read it to you, and then they proceed to tell you what it means, how that applies to their subject matter. And you're like, oh, if you're not looking for that, you get sucked in, because I used to get sucked in by this too. All this stuff, I was just like, oh, wow, okay. And I just went down the little rabbit trail. I followed their little trail of crumbs, and I was like, oh yes, tell me more, feed me. And that, it just, you can do that, but you don't know that you're safe doing that. And really, it's just not a very good way to go. Also, because people say that this was from Fatima, but it actually wasn't. That quote is a real quote, but it was recounted later in Father John DeMarchi's book, The True Story of Fatima, that Jacinta had separate visions later in life in which she was told, we're not sure by whom, those words, although the author believed they were not hallucinations, but actual revelations. But that's not really confirmed. She was just saying these things, and somebody was writing them down, and he included them in this book as like, well, this is what Jacinta was told. And so if she was really told that, maybe she was, but it's not part of the message of Fatima. And so you can't just put that letterhead on it because Jacinta heard it. She didn't hear it at Fatima. She didn't even necessarily hear it from Our Lady. We have no idea where she heard it from. It's just something she said. And it was written down and it was in a book, and now people quote it and they kind of misattribute it oftentimes. So I just want to put that out there. That's not okay. Then the next thing to cover would be the biblical objections, which is usually based on Deuteronomy 22, verse 5, which says, "A woman shall not be clothed with man's apparel, neither shall a man use woman's apparel, for he that doeth these things is abominable before God." So that's interpreted typically to mean that Moses is condemning cross-dressing, which, we're not promoting cross-dressing. But at the time, I mean, cross-dressing would have been a little more nuanced back then anyway, because men and women's clothing was so similar. And also, if you understand the historical context, the Israelites are moving into lands where there were pagan practices going on involving cross-dressing to worship different pagan deities that they believed were bisexual. So they felt they had to dress as both when they went in to offer sacrifice to these gods. And so that was probably something the Israelites were coming into contact with, and that Moses was maybe addressing in this passage. Also, there's not a very apparel is not a very accurate translation, especially in the part about a woman shall not be clothed with man's apparel, because the word more properly translated means armor. And I don't remember the word for the woman's apparel. It's actually a different word. It's not just clothing in general. It's very specific. And that doesn't come out in the English translation, but there's a really great video that I'm going to recommend to you guys to watch called "Is It Okay for Christian Women to Wear Pants?" on the Responsible Faith channel of YouTube. And the lady on there did a really good job just summarizing this stuff and going into the etymology of the words and the context of the time to explain all this and explain why Deuteronomy isn't really condemning the wearing of pants by women. So it's just very interesting. It's worth going into because, again, a lot can be lost in translation, and also you have to remember that Jesus coming voided the old law. St. Paul uses that word void when he talks about circumcision and the old law in general being made void by our Lord's fulfillment of the law and the prophets. And, basically we're in a new phase where all of the same things don't apply. There's a lot of things listed in Deuteronomy that nobody ever thinks about doing anymore, unless they're, like really hardcore Jews, like the perpetual wearing of a prayer shawl by a man. No men are saying, "Oh man, I really should be doing this because it says so in Deuteronomy." But if somebody feels right about telling a woman she shouldn't wear pants because it says so in Deuteronomy, and it doesn't even explicitly say so, because that's not what the word was referring to, then you're like, I don't know about this. It's just interesting. We don't want to be selective. So I just would put that out there. Also, I did want to talk a little bit about women's pants being introduced into Western culture gradually. The first time you really hear about it is like 1851, when Elizabeth Smith Miller designed this outfit with Turkish trousers and a dress over top, like a shorter dress over top, and a jacket. And her friend Amelia Bloomer ended up becoming famous for wearing it. They both wore them. Other women wore them too. But Amelia Bloomer was sort of the most well-known wearer of the outfit. And so that's why the pants became known as bloomers, was in her honor and stuff. And people will say, well, it was the feminists that brought pants wearing around. And I will say, okay, there's a lot that we could get into there, because feminism is not, you can't just paint all feminism with the same brush, because there were feminists that were trying to basically make sure that women had an equal opportunity and equal recognition of value in the eyes of the state, so she could inherit, so she could have the same legal recourse if she was being mistreated, things like that, that weren't always a thing. In a perfect world where men were perfect and always took care of their women, you wouldn't need all that stuff. But the fact is that sometimes men don't take care of their women, and then women needed some kind of protection in place. And so there were people that were concerned about that, men too, not just women, that helped make sure that that happened. And some of those people get labeled as feminists, even though what they were doing really just made sense, because human beings are equal in dignity, men and women. And that wasn't always recognized legally and provided for at the same level. And so because those people did what they did, the rest of us now have the luxury of not having to be feminist, if you will, because the dirty work was done for us. So we can look at how bad radical feminism is, and the throwing off of womanhood, and basically considering it's not good enough to be a woman, I need to be like a man because, womanhood somehow limits me and I don't want any part of that. Like that, of course, is disordered because that is not embracing the beauty of our creation and our complementarity. So I would never advocate that. But I just want to say I would not identify myself as a feminist, but I believe there is a healthy kind of feminism that's not extreme and it isn't putting anybody down or trying to supplant man in his proper role. So anyway, when people talk about feminists bringing in certain fashions, I'm like, well, who are we talking about feminism? I mean, who are we talking about being feminists? What is your definition of feminism? And is it accurate in this instance? And also, just because some group of people happens to be the first to notice that pants are a lot more practical to do many things in for women as well as men, if they're the first group of people to notice that, what difference does it make? Because to say, oh, it was the feminists that did it, it's sort of an appeal to fear because we have these labels like Masons and modernists and feminists. And it's like, oh, if they were involved, I don't think I want any part of that. Oh, it was a plot. It was a conspiracy. And it's like, well, okay, I'm not saying that those people don't conspire about certain things, but it doesn't really change the fact of like, is there value in women wearing pants? Is it sometimes a useful thing? Is it an appropriate thing? Can it be an appropriate thing? And who introduced it doesn't define the answer to those questions. So I would say that's kind of an ad hominem attack because of them, being who they were. Therefore, this thing that they did wasn't any good and we should reject it. And I don't think that that's a good way to go about the argument. Anyway, so that aside, I did find a quote from Mrs. Amelia Bloomer. She was answering this preacher who had been preaching against her wearing of pants. There was some discontent out there about this new fashion coming in, but it wasn't all bad. Like there was a lot of acceptance of it. And, so it's interesting is there's another video I'm going to link down below too about the history of this, kind of how it went down and, when the pants started and why. And it was really interesting because it was actually a man's idea to reform women's outfit. And then Elizabeth Smith Miller designed it in response to that. And then Amelia Bloomer was wearing the pants and then it all, kind of developed. So it's just an interesting history and also interesting to know that these women's husbands and fathers were in favor of what they were doing. They weren't doing it in defiance of the, patriarchal system and individuals in their lives. And they had other very feminine ideas than they weren't trying to cast off their womanhood. So it's good to know about the specific people and not just, like I said before, paint them all with the same brush. Like they're all these radical man haters or femininity haters that are trying to turn over heaven and earth. Okay. So anyway, I just thought this quote was good to share because she addresses some of the biblical so-called objections to women wearing pants. So this is from a book, a collection of her works. It says, on this subject, Mrs. Bloomer, in an elaborate review, only a part of which is here presented, of a sermon by the Reverend Dr. Talmage, in which he had quoted Moses as authority for women not wearing men's attire, wrote as follows. Quote, there are laws of fashion in dress older than Moses, and it would be as sensible for the preacher to direct us to them as to him. The first fashion we have any record of was set us by Adam and Eve, and we are not told that there was any difference in the styles worn by them. And they sewed fig leaves together and made themselves aprons, Genesis 3:7. Nothing here to show that his apron was bifurcated and hers not, that hers was long and his short. We are led to suppose that they were just alike. The second fashion was made by God himself, and it would be supposed that if he intended the sexes to be distinguished by their garments, explicit directions would have been given as to the style of each. Unto Adam also, and unto his wife did the Lord God make coats of skins and clothed them. Genesis 3:21. Not a word as to any difference in the cut and makeup of the coats. No command to her that she must swathe and cripple herself in long, tight, heavy, draggling skirts, while he dons the more comfortable, healthy, bifurcated garment. God clothed them just alike and made no signs that henceforth they should be distinguished by apparel. And for long years there was little, if any, difference. And it explains, after showing the character of the dress of different ancient nations, Egyptians, Babylonians, Israelites, Persians, Romans, Saxons, Normans, Turks, and Chinese, and that there was no essential difference between the dress worn by men and women, Mrs. Bloomer proceeds, quote, with all the history of male and female attire before him, and with so much proof of the similarity in dress, How can Mr. Talmage set up the claim that men have a right to any particular style, and that if women dare to approach that style, they break divine law and commit great sin and wrong? It is a presumption and insult which women everywhere should resent. It matters not to us what Moses had to say to the men and women of his time about what they should wear. Our divine entirely disregards the command of the ancient lawgiver by not putting fringes and blue ribbons on his garments. Common sense teaches us that the dress which is the most convenient and best adapted to our needs is the proper dress for both men and women to wear. There is no reason why woman should burden herself with clothes to the detriment of her health, comfort, and life, while man adopts a style that gives freedom of limb and motion. There is no divine law requiring such doings. 100 other laws and customs of the days of Adam, Noah, Abraham, and Moses are as binding upon the men and women of this day as the text from which he gives his lecture. Judging from the present customs, men have transgressed that law more than women. We do not advocate the same style of dress altogether for both sexes, and should be sorry to see women dress just like men. Yet we should like to see a radical reform in women's costumes so that she might be the free, healthy being God made her, instead of the corseted, crippled, dragged down creature her slavery to clothes has made her. No law of God stands in the way of her freedom. Unquote. So that is Amelia Bloomer, and I just thought that was kind of a useful thing to read because I thought it was pretty common sense, and she had some good points, even if you don't agree with her on every point, but I mean, common sense is just good. Okay, so another thing I wanted to address is this book, Dressing with Dignity, that Colleen Hammond wrote, and I read it many years ago, and it had a big impact on me at the time. And I came out of reading that book just convinced that I was sinning if I didn't follow the standards that she laid out in her book, because she made such a convincing argument. But time has passed. I have also gone over that book again a little bit. And I noticed some interesting things, that she does make some really good points and some things worth thinking about for sure. Like, it's not like I'm throwing out the whole book, but she definitely has a certain program she wants to promote. And what she tends to do is she takes these snippets of quotes out of different addresses or speeches by the popes, because the popes haven't written a lot about modesty. There was a papal decree in 1930 about, exhorting people to modesty, but it was very general. And so she does quote from that, and some other remarks of Pius XII. Pretty much everything she has, if I remember right, was from Pius XII. And he has some good things to say. But what she tends to do is say the quote. I mean, of course he has good things to say. I'm sorry, that was stupid. And so she takes the quote and then she proceeds to interpret it for you and kind of be like, so you see that the Pope is saying this is wrong. And then she kind of gets specific, or see how it's making my point for me. And you're like, oh, like she's crafting this narrative, putting these quotes in at certain places and then telling you, aha, this is what it means. This is what he's talking about. He's condemning these styles, these things. And so you see why we can't wear them, or, this thing. And I'm like, oh, that's very interesting. And I've noticed other priests preaching about modesty doing a similar thing. They give you a quote or a tidbit of something, and then they proceed to interpret it for you. And another thing that they specifically will tend to do, especially when they're talking about pants, is they'll give you a quote. They'll be like, talking about how important modesty is and how, terrible it is to dress immodestly and all the dangers that can happen and the harm to souls. And then they go right into talking about yoga pants. It's like the worst kind of pants you could talk about. That's what they talk to. And then yoga pants. Oh, they're just terrible. So you see why, and I'm like, wait a second, there's a whole range of pants. Okay. There's a lot of different kinds of pants we could talk about. Why are you zeroing in on yoga pants in this general covering of the treatment of pants? Okay. So I used to not read things with such a critical eye. And then I learned the hard way that it just doesn't pay to do that, because you end up following some individual down their rabbit hole interpretation of everything. And they may have a really good idea, a good slant, but it's not going to be totally balanced, because no individual one of us is totally balanced. So you just take what you can that's good, and you just especially don't give into the fear manipulation. There's a lot of fear motivation out there when they talk about modesty stuff. And I get it. We don't want to fall into sin. We don't want anybody to fall into sin because of us. It's good to be mindful of that. But we need to remember that love should be the primary motivator of what we're doing, not fear. So fear is a beginning, love is the end. So we've got to always be moving towards acting out of love more than out of fear, and trying to keep that in mind. And if you just are constantly like trying to scare people into doing the right thing, they just sort of shut down and hunker. And then they're like, well, please just tell me the one thing I got to do, and I'll just do the right thing, and I'll just forget about everything else, because I don't even want to mess with the gray area. And it's like, okay, well, That seems really useful, but at the same time, it's not mature. And we really need to form ourselves, educate ourselves, and grow in our ability to discern and in our, experience of discernment, because you can't just call your priest up on the phone every single time you have a question about, is this okay for my daughter to wear? This happened to me the other day and I just don't know what to do about it. And I mean, sometimes there are things like that, but my gosh, your priest is not your therapist. He can't be there for every little thing. But if that's how you're going to live your life and qualify everything, then that's probably what you're going to end up doing, or you're going to feel like you need that. Anyway, dressing with dignity, page 49, she talks about marketing studies that were done in like the 70s when pants were really finally becoming a thing. Like they'd been worn on and off, and usually like in a private manner, or for women to do chores around the farm and stuff, they would wear pants. But in public, women were wearing skirts pretty much exclusively, except for a few like movie stars. But 60s and 70s hit and women started wearing pants a lot more. And so then the marketing companies were doing studies to see how they could market pants and what effects pants were having on their customers and stuff. I do think it's interesting because she references these marketing studies, but she doesn't give any citation or reference to the actual studies, which is kind of odd because Colleen is pretty good in her book about giving references to a lot of things that she talks about. And so I did notice that. I looked and I was like, why is there no reference to the study? So you can't look it up and you can't see how it was done, what else they discovered in the study, or how they're getting the results that she's quoting to you. So I don't know if this is something she just sort of heard about from somebody she knew who was involved in it at one point, or if she actually could provide documentation of this. But anyway, she says that the study tracked men's eyes when they were looking at a woman in pants from the back and from the front. Where did their eyes immediately go when they saw a woman wearing pants? Not to her face, not to her chest, but right to her crotch. And then she talks about the whole continuation of line, like you draw part of a line for the human eye, and the human eye will continue and finish the line in the picture in their mind. So you don't have to have everything there, because you just need enough to get them going, and then they finish it. So she's using that to say men look at a woman in pants and they immediately look at her crotch, and it's because the lines showing her legs draw the eye up, and there's just nothing that can be done about it unless you basically cut that off by wearing a skirt. The skirt is the only thing that can prevent that, and then slits in skirts do the same thing, so you should avoid slits in skirts, things like that. Okay. I thought this was interesting because I was talking with my husband about this study thing, and he goes, okay, but at the time that they did those studies, those men were not used to seeing women in pants as a general thing. They hadn't been formed like that. So of course they were going to notice something that was noticeable as distinct from when a woman wore a skirt, and their eyes were going to go there. And he's like, I don't think that would be the case now. And it's not the case for me. I've asked other men and they've said, no, my eyes don't necessarily go to a woman's crotch when she's wearing pants. And they just look kind of mystified. And I'm like, okay, well, that's very interesting. So I'm not sure who they surveyed, and if they did that study again, if they would have the same results. Also, I think it's funny they didn't do a study with women looking at men, because I think the results would be the same. I mean, basically the same. What about all the stereotypic, comedic comments about women admiring men's cute butts in pop culture? I mean, they're all over, and there's a reason for that because women notice men's rear ends too. I mean, people will say, well, men's shape or women's shape is different. It's more beautiful. It's more attractive. It's more noticeable, whatever. And it's like, okay, well, to a man, yeah, but it's the opposite to a woman. There are some women that are very visual and that notice all kinds of stuff. So Colleen says about this, though, women's eyes may do the same thing, finish the line in their mind. But since women don't have the same type of temptations, their imaginations don't complete the picture in the same way as men's do. So she makes that claim of all women, and I think that's humorous because she can't really speak for all women, and I'm sure that's not true. You're dismissing the fact that some women are very visual and they also struggle with purity and the appearance of other people. And that could be quite a large number of women. I mean, how do you know unless you go around and ask? Everybody's like, men are visual, men are visual. It's like, yeah, well, I know somebody who thinks men's forearms are sexy. And so when a guy has his shirt sleeves rolled up, she finds that very distracting, and she has to make herself look away because otherwise she can get, to just thinking a little too much about it. I know I could give you so many examples. I mean, it's just like, but we're not out there campaigning that men change their dress. It's like, well, we just know ourselves. And we're like, men have bodies. We were made to desire each other. So that's just going to happen. You're going to notice people and you're going to be like, oh, that person is nice looking, or they fit nicely in their pants or whatever. And it's like, okay, it's okay to just notice that. You don't have to dwell on it. Just move on. It's like, that was their body. God made their body good. I happened to notice it, and then I moved on. I didn't sit there and drag myself down in the gutter and them with me. It doesn't have to be like that. And men, there is nothing saying that men have to be like that about women. Yeah, there's concupiscence, but you know what? You get a say in what happens with that concupiscence and where you take it. So I'm not advocating any kind of extreme dressing at all here, but I just want to put that out there because, again, don't discount what some women are dealing with too and make it sound like it's just this man thing and that all the women therefore need to accommodate the men. It's like this is actually kind of universal to mankind and womankind. And so I'm a little tired of these very, black and white distinctions that I don't think really exist. I understand scientifically brains and eyes and things are a little different, the way the brain works in men and women. I totally acknowledge that. That is true. But I just, anyway, whatever. Call me a pervert if you want, but I notice men's rear ends, especially in church, because if you're sitting, you're just sitting right there behind all these rear ends. And it's like, what else am I going to look at? Or you're just sort of zoning out. You're standing in church, like trying to, think about holy things. And then all of a sudden you realize you're staring at somebody's rear end and you're like, oh, I guess I'll just look somewhere else. That's what I think. I don't think that man should go home, put on a robe. How distracting, It's like men are going to wear pants. Men would laugh in your face if you said, did you know that you wearing pants is a stumbling block to me and my, sisters in the faith? They would be like, whatever. I mean, okay, I could be wrong. If I was wrong, please tell me. Please tell me that you would go home and start dressing like Jesus if you want us to dress like Mary. I was like, okay. I don't think that you can't draw good principles from that idea of dressing like Mary and all those good things. But at the same time, it's like, it was a different culture. It was a different place of the world. It was a different time in history. There hadn't been these developments. It's just so many things we could go into. And Mary dressed as a woman of her time. She wasn't dressing in a way to stand out. So I'm not saying that, it's bad to stand out sometimes, but part of modest dress is dressing so as not to draw attention to yourself. Anyway, we'll say more about that in a little bit. But anyway, I just think it's interesting too. I know I'm going to get called a feminist for doing this video, but especially for saying this too. But I just have to notice men tend to get dibs on convenience, especially in the world of fashion. I mean, pants were developed for them first. And then later women discovered them, put them on. And then it's like this, oh, what? Why do you think you can wear that? It's like, why do you think you can dress like that? Why was it okay for men to develop and start wearing pants? But then it's this shocking thing when women want to do it too. And it's like, interesting. Partly, I think men just don't want to fuss with stuff as much. So if they find a better way out, they're like, well, yeah, I'm going to take that. Like they're looking for a way to make things more streamlined and efficient. So they're not like women don't, but I think men are just like, I don't want to bother with it. How can I get around this thing? And then they find a way and they go for it. And women they're willing to put up with stuff. They might take a little longer getting to that. But when they do, it's like somebody's going to slam the door in their face. I don't understand that. So anyway, when men's parts obviously protrude in the front too, it's like, why on earth is it considered modest for them to wear something that draws a line right there and exposes it to more convenient viewing? We all know what each other looks like. So I'm just going to say, if men want to think about a woman and how she looks, they don't need a pair of pants or a slit in a skirt to finish a picture in their mind. They already know. They know women have two legs. They know we have a rear end. And if they're going to think about us, they're going to think about us probably regardless of what we're wearing. I'm not encouraging immodest dress and revealing clothing that draws attention to certain things. We will talk about that more. But really, you don't have that much control. Wouldn't that be great? If you could just totally protect men and prevent them from having any issues or crazy thoughts when they're around you, but you just can't fully do that. And I think it's not realistic. And it's also not fair to put that on a woman, be like, if you just didn't blah, 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 men wouldn't have a problem. And it's like, if I weren't a woman, you mean men wouldn't have a problem? And it's like, well, I can't really do anything about that. Another interesting thing to point out is like Matthew 5:28. And he's talking about Jesus is saying, whosoever shall look on a woman to lust after her hath already committed adultery with her in his heart. And if thy right eye scandalize thee, pluck it out and cast it from thee. For it is expedient for thee that one of thy members should perish, rather than that thy whole body be cast into hell. And if thy right hand scandalize thee, cut it off and cast it from thee. For it is expedient for thee that one of thy members should perish, rather than that thy whole body be cast into hell. And then the next few verses, he's addressing men and the subject of whether divorcing their wives is possible or not. So it's interesting. This paragraph is really geared towards men. In the middle, he doesn't specifically say men when he's talking about the eye and the hand. But before and after he is talking about men. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. But as far as that, it's interesting because Jesus doesn't say, if you sin by your eye, that person responsible better go cover up. He puts the responsibility on the sinner. And we know that if we're being careless and we cause someone to sin, we bear a share of responsibility for that. But primarily, you have to remember, primarily that person has a choice to make when they're presented with a situation like that. And just because they're presented with a temptation does not mean that you necessarily are culpable for providing that temptation, because maybe you were actually dressed in a conservative enough manner and they're just particularly weak or unusually weak in that area. And so therefore, you've done what you can. You've tried to be mindful and careful, and they're still struggling. And Jesus isn't saying, sorry, sister, you didn't do enough. Go home and put on some more clothes. And not like he wouldn't say that to you, but again, you have to take responsibility for yourself. And that man has to take responsibility for himself. And so I just think that's a good point. I mean, charity, yes, within reason, but enabling men to continue to objectify women and subordinating ourselves to that immature trajectory by concealing our form as if that's some kind of solution doesn't solve the problem that men need to grow in their moral strength and learn to see the female body as a gift, not a temptation. I mean, God, he has made us a certain way. And he has also given us grace and tools and developed theology in church teaching about human sexuality and what God's vision is for that and why he created us that way. And learning about that really redeems your sight, inner and outer, and helps you to understand what it is that you're seeing when you look on somebody, whether they're clothed or not. Because guess what? We live in a secular culture, not a Christian culture. And in this secular culture, you're going to be seeing stuff you don't have control over and stuff you shouldn't be seeing, but it's out there and you need to be ready so that when you see it, you know how to handle it and that you can handle it in a redeemed fashion, as in that person could be wearing more clothes and it would probably be better for me if they were wearing more clothes. It'd be better for them because they're beautiful, but we don't want anyone to see them and objectify them. And I'm not going to objectify them because I see somebody beautiful that God made for his glory and their happiness. And I don't want to hurt that person in any way. I'm just going to glorify God that that person is beautiful and I'm going to go about my day. You think about something else and you move on. Okay. That is a redeemed vision instead of like, oh my gosh, I can't handle it. I can't believe what I just saw. That woman should be ashamed of herself. She shouldn't be doing that. Or she should be teaching her daughter better, whatever. I mean, that there's probably truth to that. There could be, definitely. But again, it's like, oh, you just can't go around casting things on other people because you don't have control over that. You got to control what's going on in here. So at this point in the Western world, I would venture to say that no man is going to struggle with seeing a woman in a pair of decent pants unless he is compromised by something like a porn addiction or having been sexually abused. I mean, if this is the case, then asking women not to wear pants would be like if I had developed an addictive eating disorder that rendered me corpulently fat. And I said to other people, you have no right to eat food in my presence, or I would say, don't ever eat food in my presence. Then that wouldn't be fair. And it wouldn't deliver me from my disorder because I would need to remove myself and seek treatment to resolve the problem before returning to my life as normal. In the same vein, that's what people so crippled with purity disorders would need to do too. So I'm just going to say that. You can't take on, if somebody has a particular wound and problem that makes them vulnerable, you can't fix that for them. And you can't protect them from everything that might affect them as a result. They need help. They need God's help. They might need psychological help. They might need some kind of literal treatment because of how hurt they've been. And so that's something that we pray that they will get what they need so that they have the tools and the grace and strength to handle what comes at them in life because God wants that for them. So we should pray for that. So I'm a skirt wearer and I think skirts and dresses are great. So I'm not trying to slam that. It's just this video is about pants and if it's okay for women to wear pants. And I'm just talking to you women out there who are watching this video because you are wondering what to do and how to think about this. And I just want to kind of speak to that a little bit that, we said before, there's pants and then there's pants. There's like yoga pants and then there's like flowy, elegant, simple pants, that feminine pants. There's also like men's pants and women's pants. I mean, it's very clear. If you would look weird if you saw a guy walking around in a pair of women's pants, you could be like, those are women's pants. So pants there's different kinds of pants, and you can tell if they're women's pants or men's pants. So again, we're not really talking about wearing men's clothes here because they aren't men's clothes. At this point, they've developed into women's styles. Women are wearing them suited for their own shape and dignity and decorum, okay? But there are kinds of pants that, do draw attention. And like you can see how obviously men are affected less by women wearing pants than at one time, because now companies are trying to add fading like on the rear end and the upper thigh to draw attention to that part when you look at it, or crusting the pockets with bling and fancy stitching and stuff, because it's like, oh, people are getting too used to this. We got to somehow get their eyes back on the thing. Okay. And that's so again, it's like, don't put on pants that are like that. No second skin sprayed on, stuff that shows every curve of your body, because golly, why are we wearing anything if we're going to do that, unless it's just to keep out the cold? But anyway, so yeah, I'm not advocating for second skin tight pants, bling or fancy stitching on pockets, purposely placed fading, light colors of pants too. Light colors just are more noticeable in every crease, and shadow that are created by the fabric moving while you move. It's just more noticeable with a light color. So dark colors are a lot more forgiving. And also like ripped pants that show, skin on different places, or just draw attention to certain places on the legs. It's just also, I mean, it's not really dignified to wear ripped stuff, because it's kind of like junky. Like, do you respect the people that you're going out to see? I mean, okay, I have worn ripped pants because I just didn't get around to fixing the knee, but it was like just in the knee, okay? And it's just like, well, I need to patch that, but I haven't got to it. So anyway, I mean, I'll say, like, if it just happens and you're like, I'll take care of it soon, that's fine. I mean, but whatever. And don't take what I say dogmatically. I'm not trying to put anything on anybody. And again, because you don't need another voice telling you that. I'm just saying, these are just things to think about when you're thinking about what kinds of pants can be decent, what kinds of pants can be appropriate. It's also important, I believe, to model proper pants wearing, because if you just never wear pants, that's fine. That's up to you. But if you don't, then you are missing the opportunity to show women how you can wear pants beautifully, femininely, and decently, and be an inspiration. And also just, just a beautiful woman in a pair of pants. Anyway, you can be a beautiful woman in a skirt, and that's good too. But anyway, so yeah, there's flowy pants, elegant, simple lines, darker colors, not distracting or attention getting, that don't show every iota of your shape. Another thing I wanted to say, jeans with no pockets. That's a really weird thing. Sometimes on women's pants, they don't put pockets on the back. And it's really weird, because when you see that, you are used to seeing pockets on jeans. And when they don't have pockets, you look, because you're like, where are the pockets? And also on jeans, there's like that wide seam that goes right down the crack. And that kind of draws your eye, especially when there's no pockets, because then you're like, all I see is that line going down the crotch. So I used to say, just if you see a pair of pants like that, don't buy it. Don't buy jeans with no pockets, because that's weird. Okay. Also, a brief word about shorts, because if you're going to ask, I'm just going to say, I'm not a shorts advocate. I don't really wear shorts. I have a pair of pajama shorts, but I don't wear them out. I'm not into knees. I just think there's no reason to show knees. Knees are not attractive, and I just say keep them covered. But I have seen shorts worn that didn't attract or distract, so I think it's possible to do well if you have a need. But again, it's like, do you really need to wear shorts? Only in certain limited capacities, probably like swimming, and I don't know what else, but okay. It is now a cultural norm to wear pants. Fashions are spreading all over the world from culture to culture. That wasn't a thing long ago, when customs were more localized, and Western customs aren't the only standard to go by. As I said before, the church is universal, and there's a whole world out there, and you like it or not, everything's international. We're blending all the time. We're picking up things from other people and other cultures that we wouldn't have even ever been exposed to before. And that's not all bad. It just gets messy sometimes. It just looks different, and sometimes people don't like change, but that doesn't mean the change is bad. And like I said, there's been so many cultures throughout history and in different places of the world where pants were traditional wear for, garb for women. And that wasn't as true in Western culture. It wasn't true, but now it has become customary. And so it's like traditions start somewhere, they start somewhere. So looks like pants are probably here to stay. If you don't wear pants, you kind of stand out. And it looks like you're protesting something or trying to set yourself apart. And I get it. Sometimes we have to be countercultural, but in areas where we don't have to be, taking a stand on something that makes us less approachable and relatable makes it harder to evangelize and attract people unless they want to be weird, like they want. I'm not saying that everybody who just wears skirts is weird, because I do know some women that just never wear pants. They just decided not to. One woman was because she's got so tired of trying to find a pair of pants that fit her just right, because she was shaped in such a way. She's like, I always have to alter pants after I buy them and it drives me crazy. So she didn't wear pants for like 15 years. And I was like, whatever, good on you. But I knew she wasn't protesting anything. But other women I've seen that just never do wear pants, it's like you kind of have this feeling about them, like, is she okay with the fact that I wear pants sometimes? Is she somebody who would want to be my friend? Like, if I went up to her and talked to her, would she just start like telling me why she believes certain things and she thinks everybody should do them because she's probably a person of conviction and maybe she wants to convert me to her way of thinking or something? You're just like, is she normal? Like, does she want to get to know other people like me? Would I be somebody she want to be friends with? And you just don't know. And so, I mean, I honestly, though, manner and friendliness and stuff are a lot more important as far as how approachable you are. And, we see this all the time with like nuns and habits and people like, oh, a sister, and they go up to her and they talk to her and stuff. They're not like, oh, she's wearing a habit, she's weird, So it can be totally not an inhibitor, but you have to always maintain that manner that makes you approachable and sends the message that's like, I love everybody and I want to get to know you. And then it doesn't really matter what you're wearing. But a lot of women that just exclusively like wear certain prints or like this frumpy dumpy kind of like, I barely did my hair this morning, I'm not wearing any makeup, I wear, faded print dresses and jumpers and stuff like that. It's like, oh, it's just noticeable. And people are kind of like, huh, okay. It just doesn't make people as at ease around you. It makes you kind of stand out in a way that might actually make it harder for you to have an influence on those people for good. So it's just something to think about. I'm not saying everybody should do the same thing and that, I'm saying do what you're convicted to do, but just know that it could have that effect unless you're compensating with your personable manner to everyone. To say that, I mean, an interesting observation of an older male friend of our family, the regular or naked women that he sees out and about don't affect him because he's trained himself how to deal with the sight of them. But it's the modest, veiled, covered women who distract and attract him. Like at church, he's like, if he sees somebody who's purposely like covering up and stuff and acting reverent and modest, he's like, wow, like he really notices her. And he's more tempted by somebody like that because he's like, I recognize that she's trying to be good and her goodness makes her beautiful and very attractive. And he's like, so that's who I notice. And that's who I consciously have to be like, oh, don't look at her too much. Don't think about her too much. Cause it's like, wow, she's really cool. I really appreciate that. But again, it's like, isn't that interesting? It's not just naked people that get attention. It's like, one time I was going to the lake with a friend of mine. We were going to go paddle boating and we were all dressed up to go. And of course we're not in swimsuits because she was a consecrated laywoman and she covers up all the time. And I, covered up all the time too. So we're like fully clothed, neck down, sleeves, I had pants on, but I had like a wrap tied around my waist, so you couldn't see my rear end. And we come walking through the kitchen and our priest friend was sitting in the kitchen and he's like, where are you going? And we said, we're going paddle boating. And he's like, holy cow. And he's like, people are going to be staring at you more than at the naked people. And I just laughed. I mean, he wasn't endorsing like, oh, why don't you take off some clothes? But he just is laughing at us because he's like, wow, look at you. You're going to the lake. Who would have thought? It totally didn't look like it. That is just funny. I mean, yeah. So anyway, and I just want to say too, as a woman with a changing body because of pregnancy and nursing and stuff, pants, especially with stretch, are a big help. If part of modesty is dressing so as not to draw attention, and it is, when I am extremely pregnant and I wear a dress, it looks like I have a mountain stuck on the front of me or another person huddled inside my dress. I mean, wow. Okay. It's like, hello, everyone. Here I am. I carry all my babies like beach balls and boy, they do stick out. So it's just like, hey, I'm coming through, it's just like, I feel huge. I look huge. And it's like, I don't think there's anything wrong with being noticeable that you have a pregnant tummy, like that's a cool thing. And I actually kind of like to wear shirts that show the bump when I'm pregnant because it's like, hey, I have life inside me. Isn't it so cool? I think it's great. But it can be a little like if you can wear pants or something that's a little more slimming, it can help you not to feel so self-conscious or just like, oh, look like you're this mountain swishing around. So anyway, and I also have to say that as someone in a cold climate, it gets kind of ridiculous with, especially when you're pregnant, but in general, anyway, you're fussing with a skirt, a slip, leggings, underpants, etc. every single time you have to go to the bathroom. And that can be very frequent sometimes. And then sometimes you don't have very much time because you got in the bathroom and 20 seconds after you stepped out of the room, your kids all start having a meltdown. So you don't have a lot of time, and it gets really frustrating when you're just fussing, fussing, fussing. So again, here we come to this: women's clothes aren't always convenient, and women do, like, they're up and down, they're picking up kids, they're scrubbing on the floor, they're picking up toys, they're crawling around, they're climbing stairs, and lying down with a baby, sneaking out from under the baby so you don't wake him up. All these things, the more fabric and layers and things we have, the more it impedes our ability to do those things freely and easily. And honestly, how much is your principle of skirt wearing worth? When it comes down to it, it's kind of like, at least to know you have the option that if it's like, today, I just feel like I psychologically need a break, I want to wear pants so I don't have to worry about all that extra stuff. It's just, I think, a merciful thing to give yourself that option, and to tell yourself it's okay, because the church has not said it's a sin to wear pants, and the Bible does not say it's a sin to wear pants. However people want to construe it, I mean, there's just ways. I mean, also, skirts are beautiful and they're feminine, but they can also be immodest and draw attention depending on the drape, the fabric, the designs, and most importantly, the comportment of the women wearing them. The heart is going to shine through regardless of what you're covering up with. And I've seen women wearing barely anything who I could tell from their comportment were not bad people looking to get attention or to throw people in the path of sin. Like, they were just wearing something they found that they liked, that fit. And they were decent women. Like, they behaved modestly. And even though their clothes were not, reiterating that message. So I was like, oh, like, they're not trying to be bad wearing that. And also, as a woman, it's very hard to shop and find things that cover you, that you like, that fit properly, that are flattering, because it's not enough. I'm sorry. It's just not enough to wear a gunny sack or a denim jumper or something, along those lines. Just, I'm covered. It's like, yeah. And my natural beauty that God gave me as a woman is supposed to speak for him. It is supposed to draw people to him, to praise him, and to appreciate his creation. And so there is no way in which a woman is bound to conceal what God made her to be beautiful with. He didn't give us beauty so that we would hide it. For whatever that's worth, I just wanted to share what I found, and I hope it was helpful. Let me know if you have any other questions you would like me to cover in the comments below. You can leave them, or you can email me at lauravandervos@outlook.com. And again, check out our website, tradrecovery.com. If you are a recovering traditionalist or have friends or family in traditionalism and you're seeking to understand more and the church's actual teaching, helpful resources, discussion questions, we've got a forum and a groups page and events, all these things on there that are just helpful resources for you and yours to help you navigate into your full integration into Catholicism and the bosom of the church. So may God bless you. Thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed this video, and we will see you again soon. God bless.